As the early evening light slid across the colonnades of St. Peter's Square, Rome seemed to hold its breath. Above the crowd, above the cameras, above the restless anticipation, a single chimney stood watch, silent, simple, and yet impossibly significant. The chimney atop the Sistine Chapel had, for centuries, served as the quiet herald of history. And on this spring evening, it would speak again. Below, the square was overflowing. Tens of thousands pressed in shoulder to shoulder. Some whispered rosaries, others gripped their phones, ready to capture a moment that would live far beyond their lifetimes. The mood was heavy with reverence and charged with electricity, the kind that only appears when ancient ritual meets the edge of the unknown. Then, without warning, it rose. White smoke. A collective gasp surged through the crowd. Then cheering. Then the bells. Bells that have rung for generations, now pealing across the Vatican once more. Cameras turned upward. Children were lifted onto shoulders. People wept. History was happening. From the balcony above, the voice came, clear and ceremonial. Annuntio vobis gaudium magnum, habemus papam. And then came the name no one expected, Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost. A moment later, he stepped into the light as Pope Leo XIV. The shock was immediate and global. He was the 267th successor to Peter and the first Roman pontiff ever born in the United States. The implications were enormous. The symbolism unmistakable. In Chicago, where he was born, church bells rang again, this time echoing through neighborhoods built by immigrants, shaped by industry, and still marked by their parish steeples. In Trujillo, Peru, where he had once served not as a cardinal, but as a missionary and seminary rector, families flooded the streets. Old women cried. Children waved makeshift flags. In both countries, pride gave way to something more tender, hope. His election wasn't just a surprise, it was seismic. The Church had chosen someone not because he stood outside the system, but because he had walked so deeply within it, quietly, humbly, across cultures and continents. The conclave had lasted only 3 days. Pope Francis's death was still fresh. His legacy, complex, beloved, debated, hovered over the proceedings like a spirit not ready to leave. Cardinals entered the Sistine Chapel knowing they weren't just electing a man. They were deciding the future direction of a church stretched thin across a fractured world. Prevost's name began surfacing early in conversations, not as a front-runner, but as someone too seasoned and too steady to be ignored. He was American by birth, Peruvian by citizenship, Augustinian by formation, and global by vocation. He'd lived in shanty towns and sat at Vatican desks. He wasn't polished, but he was real. And then there was the name he chose, Leo. The last pope. Leo XIII, had died in 1903. He was a scholar, a teacher, and the author of Rerum Novarum, the encyclical that laid the intellectual groundwork for Catholic social teaching. Labor, economics, human dignity. Leo XIII had pulled the Church into the modern age. By choosing the name Leo XIV, Prevost signaled something, a desire not to break with tradition, but to deepen it, not to start a revolution, but to quietly reform from within. His first words confirmed it. From the balcony, he did not project dominance. He radiated stillness. "We still hear in our ears," he said, "the weak but always courageous voice of Pope Francis who blessed us." And then, United and hand in hand with God, let us advance together. No slogans, no vision statements, just a missionary's phrase, a bishop's hope, a pastor's invitation. Robert Prevost was born in 1955 in Chicago's working-class Southwest neighborhoods, the son of immigrants, Spanish and Italian by blood, Catholic by instinct. In his home, faith wasn't a display. It was woven into meals, conversations, bedtime prayers. He served as an altar boy. He visited the sick with his parish priest. He watched his parents volunteer, give, listen. The church wasn't just a place they went. It was who they were. By his early 20s, he joined the Order of St. Augustine, a decision that set the trajectory of his life. The Augustinians, followers of the restless, brilliant mind of St. Augustine of Hippo, taught him that interiority was as important as action, that prayer and presence went hand in hand, that the Church's future wasn't about controlling doctrine, but embodying it. Ordained in 1982, he expected a life of teaching, but in 1985, he was sent to Peru, and Peru changed everything. Assigned to the Diocese of Trujillo, he quickly became immersed in local life, not as a visitor, but as a brother. He learned Spanish fluently. He ate with farmers. He buried the dead. He lived simply, sharing rooms with fellow priests and the occasional mosquito swarm. By the 1990s, he was rector of the seminary, forming young priests not with abstractions, but by modeling a spirituality rooted in community, humility, and service. His Augustinian training gave him theological depth. Peru gave him a heart that beat to the rhythm of the poor. As political unrest and poverty deepened in the region, he didn't leave. He stayed. He walked. He listened. And he preached, not platitudes, but gospel truths that addressed suffering directly. In 2001, he was elected Prior General of the Augustinian Order worldwide. The role sent him around the globe, Africa, Asia, Europe, but his heart remained in Latin America. When he completed his term after 12 years, he returned not to Chicago, but to Peru. In 2015, Pope Francis appointed him Bishop of Chiclayo, a large and difficult diocese. There he confronted corruption, built trust, and elevated the voices of lay people, especially women. His sermons were quiet but clear. His door was always open. Then, in 2023, Francis brought him to Rome again, this time as prefect of the dicastery for bishops. It was one of the most critical positions in the Church. He was now responsible for overseeing the appointment of bishops globally, a task made urgent by the moral wounds of clerical abuse and growing distrust in church hierarchy. Colleagues described him as meticulous, prayerful, resistant to political games. He read dossiers late into the night. He called bishops personally. He asked about their people, not their ideologies. Then came 2025. Pope Francis passed, and Robert Prevost's name moved from short list to center stage. As Pope Leo XIV, he inherits not just a church, but a crisis. Sex abuse scandals still smolder. Some whisper about how his former diocese in Peru handled allegations. While there is no evidence of wrongdoing, critics demand transparency. Survivors demand more than apologies. And Leo XIV knows that any credibility he builds must begin with victims, not bureaucracy. Then there's polarization. From North America to Germany to Africa, Catholics argue over doctrine, liturgy, sexuality, governance. Pope Francis tried to hold the Church together by emphasizing synodality, walking together. Leo XIV appears to continue that trajectory, but with even more calm. On LGBTQ+ issues, he's said little publicly, but his track record shows a preference for accompaniment over condemnation. People who've worked with him describe him as pastoral, open, unafraid to ask questions, but slow to issue judgment. That approach won't satisfy everyone, but it reflects a theology grounded in relationship. On the environment, he is vocal. In Peru, he saw firsthand the damage caused by extractive industries. Entire communities poisoned, rivers drying up, crops failing. His ecological view isn't academic, it's visceral. He embraces the idea of integral ecology, that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are not separate issues. They are the same wound. And then there's governance. He is not a reformer for reform's sake, but he believes in conversion, personal and institutional. In his first weeks, Vatican watchers noted small but telling shifts, more dialogue among dicasteries, a renewed emphasis on subsidiarity, and early discussions about increasing roles for lay people, including women, in decision-making. He doesn't seek headlines, but he is not afraid of change, and his Augustinian soul remains visible in everything, from the structure of his papal addresses to the way he ends meetings with prayer, not applause. He is not charismatic in the conventional sense. He is not a showman. He speaks slowly, sometimes searching for the right word. But those who listen hear substance, patience, clarity. He may not grab the world's attention like John Paul II or Pope Francis, but he might just do something more important. He may restore trust. As he settles into the role, his priorities will become clearer. But already the Church senses a shift, not toward ideology, but toward communion. In Rome, curial officials describe him as serene, deliberate, uninterested in palace intrigue. In the global South, bishops express hope that their realities, often overlooked, will now shape the Church's center of gravity. And among the faithful, those who've grown tired of infighting, scandal, and posturing, there is cautious optimism. A pope who walked with the poor, a pope who prefers questions to decrees, a pope who understands the Church not as a fortress, but as a home, sometimes messy, sometimes wounded, but always open. As the sun set on that evening of white smoke, one thing became clear. The Church had not elected a savior. It had chosen a servant. And sometimes that's the miracle the world most needs. Pope Leo XIV has begun his work, and the Church, hand in hand, walks forward together.